Crossovers are becoming a norm here on the Locked On Pirates and Locked On Cardinals podcast as of late, as the month of May for Pirates fans is thankfully gone. I'm so happy it's gone. And they have an NL Central foe to face to start the month of June, which features a much more favorable but also arguably the most important stretch of the year for the Pittsburgh Pirates and the St. Louis Cardinals. I am joined by JD Hafron of Locked On Cardinals. For my Locked On Pirates folks, you're probably familiar with him because we did a crossover from the first series, which was a very fun series in its own right, but also feels like it was like a year and a half ago. So, JD, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing excellent, man. We've got another new month upon us now, and we're putting May in the rearview mirror. Although it wasn't a bad May for the Cardinals, it was better than April, and what we saw from the Cardinals in the first month of games where they were 10-19 to start the year, it's starting to look a little bit more like themselves, but still a lot of room for improvement.
Yes, and the NL Central, of course, very fun division. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the second segment. The Pirates can enter this series with a Brewers loss today, which is very possible. They play the Blue Jays. The Blue Jays, of course, are good at AL East team in that division. That's crazy. I think every team in that division would actually be leading this division. The Red Sox would be tied for first in this division. But if the Brewers lose today, the Pirates are a half game back of first place going into the series against a Cardinals team that has had a lot going on already this year. You have the pitching woes that have plagued this Cardinals team. You have the Wilson Contreras stuff with he can't catch or whatever was going on there, and then he moves to the outfield. You have the emergences of Nolan Gorman in the not so great play of Nolan Arenado, which has not made a lot of fantasy baseball fans happy that may have him on their teams. But JD, obviously, I'm talking about all this from the outside perspective. How have the Cardinals gotten to this point where obviously they were very bad to start the year? They're now 25-32. How have they gotten to this point now that we sit on June 1st?
Well, as we mentioned, the 10-19 at the beginning of the year, nothing was going right. And what made it hard to watch was the fact that they were making a lot of dumb mistakes, things where they were costing themselves. It wasn't so much that other teams were beating them, they were beating themselves. You had bad pitching on some nights. You might get a little bit of hitting that next night, but then it'd be like the errors in the outfield or the bad base running. That was the stuff that was really maddening to watch when and I know it's a cocky thing to say, but we call it the Cardinal way, Cardinal baseball, and that's just not what we're used to as a fan base. We've been very spoiled with very good teams for so long. When we see them struggle a little bit, we're like, oh my gosh, season's over, let's blow it up, this is terrible. Where May comes around, they start off the month they lose their first 5. That's part of their 8-game losing streak. They finally snapped that on May 7th. And then after that point, though, they are 15-8 since May 7th. Back to being what we expected them to be more like. The pitching has turned around from the big guys have been Jack Flaherty and Miles Michaelis, who have gotten better. Adam Wainwright, Steven Matz have not been good. Jordan Montgomery was better in April, but he's come back to earth in the month of May. But it's been Flaherty and Michaelis who have really turned things around as far as the pitching rotation goes. And finally, you mentioned Nolan Arenado. He was, brutal in the month of April, and then he got hot in the month of May. Started to tail off a little bit here at the very end, like most of the offense did. And that was when they were wrapping up 19 games in 19 days. So those final 6 games, they were really... You could tell they were just wiped out, and the offense kind of fell back down into kind of what we saw more of in April. But that I believe that to be more of an exhaustion thing than to say that is what we expect to see moving forward here in the month of June. But they played a lot better baseball all around and ended up with a winning record in the month of May. So steps in the right direction.
Yes, sure. And for the Pirates, obviously, it's kind of been the reverse. We all remember the Pirates had the 20-8 start. You mentioned playing 19 games in 19 days. In April, the Pirates had to play 17 games in 17 days. Cardinals series was a part of that. May enters, you get the big gigantic matchup. You had the NL best Pirates, AL best Tampa Bay Rays. Tampa Bay makes them look silly. Then it just kept going and going and going. They finally win a game in May against Colorado. Then they lose 2. They get another win against Baltimore, lose 2. They split one against Detroit. They destroy the Diamondbacks, a very good Diamondbacks team, in a Friday game. They lose the next 2. They beat the Texas Rangers, who had one of the hottest offenses in all of baseball entering that game. They lose the next 2. They beat Seattle the first game. They lose the next 2. Then they get trounced by San Francisco, and that was a game that I feel like they needed to have happen to them, where they just get absolutely blown out in all facets of the game. They come out and win the next 2 and salvage the month, winning one series the whole month. They did not win a series the whole month until the last day. And they leave the month of May at 28-27. And I remember in my April recap show at the beginning of May, on Monday, May 1st, I said this team going 20-8 was a blessing in disguise, because obviously they are not as good as that record was, but it gave them a cushion to have a month like this. And Andrew McCutcheon spoke to Justice De Los Santos and a bunch of the writers in Pittsburgh and said, hey, would you rather have this happen now or in September? I think that's the biggest sticking point. And it was something that I spoke about with you before we hit record today. If you would have told me the Pirates were going to be 28-27, have a, I believe, 3.5 game advantage on the Cardinals, 4 games now that you guys played yesterday, and be a game out of first place, you're taking that if you're a Pirates fan. Now, obviously, the way we've gotten here is not as nice as you would like it to be. I mean, you only win 8 games in the entire month. But going into this series, JD, what do you think is like a sticking point for the Cardinals here? I mean, this is a series in Pittsburgh. It's the start of a new month. Both teams are coming out of the month looking okay. And this is a division that is up for grabs for the most part. I mean, how do you think the Cardinals prepare for this series where they face Roansy Contreras, Luis Ortiz, and Rich Hill?
At this point, because they dug themselves such a large hole in April, they can't really afford to give away any division games whatsoever, especially playing less division games this year because of the schedule differences, where we have to play every team in the major leagues. Which, it's great when you've when you're up in the standings, but not so great when you're down, because now you're like, oh my gosh, now we can't afford to. Like the Cardinals can't go to Pittsburgh and drop 2 of 3 and feel good about that. Whereas in the past, when they had a decent lead in the division, or we're going to play you guys even more, that you could be like, okay, if you lose 2 or 3, it's not the end of the world. But you've already played the Pirates 4 times. You split with them then. You can't afford to lose ground to these guys that are ahead of you in the division. So this is a very important series for them coming out of May, especially after closing out the month of May, where they split with the Royals, they lose to the Guardians, and they split with the Reds. And they were basically on fumes at the end of the month. They've gotten 2 days off to recharge. First time they've had 2 days off since 1978 was the stat. And they got to come out flying, because if they come out flat, I find that to be embarrassing, and I think that would be an issue with what's going on in the clubhouse if that is the case.
Yeah, and of course the Pirates off today as well after their series win against the Giants, so both teams should come into this series fresh. Of course, you get tomorrow's game at 7:05, 4:05 on Saturday, 11:35 in the morning on Sunday. Everybody, wake up, have your coffee ready, let's go. So that is the lineup for the series. We'll talk more about the series in the third segment, but we're going to talk about the NL Central a little bit here, JD, and why this division is just up for grabs for everybody, and some of my thoughts on what some of these teams should be thinking about moving forward. But if you want to go catch Cardinals and Pirates, you might think, oh, it's too late to get tickets. It's too late to think about going to PNC Park and getting tickets to these games. Well, I'm here to tell you it's not, because you can download the Gametime app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. So, I mean, baseball tickets are in high demand right now. Baseball's fun. It's a kind of crazy season, and buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. And forget planning months in advance, because Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. You can get exclusive flash deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And of course, the Gametime guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. So download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Of course, terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off, and download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. You can, of course, hear myself and JD Hafron of Locked On Cardinals on Sirius XM if you're listening on the radio. Of course, JD's Twitter handle is JD Sports Radio, so you can probably find him on a lot of different radio stations. But as we record today, this NL Central, and just both Centrals, we'll just throw that out there, but we're not talking about the AL Central today. The NL Central right now, if you just look over the last 10 games, you have the 5-5 Brewers over the last 10, Pittsburgh 4-6, Cincinnati 7-3, St. Louis 5-5, the Cubs 4-6. One thing that's absolutely crazy to me is that the Cubs are where they are. They are like kind of tied for last place in the entire National League. But every team in this division is separated by 5 games. And as mentioned when I talked about it earlier, and I'm going to talk about this a lot tomorrow, for all of these teams, realistically, just looking at the middle of the month, the Pirates play the Cubs, the Brewers, and the Cubs 9 straight games. That is where you're going to start seeing the divide between these teams and where they sit. Even with this series, if the Cardinals were to sweep the Pirates in this series, that gap suddenly closes to 2 games or 1 game. And then who knows what happens with Cincinnati and Milwaukee over the weekend too. Is this division really up for grabs, or is it just still too early to say? I mean, it's so weird to figure out, because yes, we're already in June, but all these teams are so congested together and nobody's really pulling away with it. So how do you view it from the Cardinals standpoint of how this division sits and where everybody sits as contending for it?
Well, we're very pleased with the fact that none of you have pulled away, considering where we were. That's what I keep telling people this, and I'm like, you got to remember, okay, the Cardinals had this terrible start to the year, and the other teams have to not win if the Cardinals ever want to catch up, because it was such a monster hole that they dug for themselves. And lucky for them, nobody has really taken control of this entire division. You mentioned you saw the Reds are hot right now. They won 5 in a row coming into Thursday. Got a chance to sweep the Red Sox tonight. They're feeling themselves, but the Cardinals just played them and split with them. So I don't know if I trust what Cincinnati's doing just yet. And when I look at anybody in the division, looking at the Cardinals as well, I don't trust any of these teams right now. I don't know if any of them are ever going to pull away. Like, there's nothing about the Cardinals that screams to me like, oh, that hot run is coming. Like that there's something that like, oh, they're going to catch fire any moment now and rattle off 7 in a row. I don't ever see that happening with this team, because their starting pitching isn't good enough to do that. Like, no, there's nobody there's not like where they're going to line up 4 of their starters and go, those 4 are expected to win over the next 4 games. That's not ever going to happen. Like, you can't tell me that that's something that you believe in if you're a Cardinals fan. And I just don't see it. Like, I feel like many of us feel like we're getting lucky with Jack Flaherty doing well recently, but you saw how bad he can be at times. And I don't know if anybody completely trusts that yet. The only guy that we trusted coming into the season was Miles Mikolas, and he's still the only guy I think that you can trust that when he goes out on that mound, you're like, we have a very good chance to win today. I don't know if you can say that about any of the other guys in the rotation ever.
Yeah, and it's interesting when I think about the pitching, because this was a sticking point for me after April with how the Pirates pitched and the bullpen that they currently possess. I think there was a stat the other day that I talked about on yesterday's show where we're the only team in baseball to have 5 relievers with under a 2.25 ERA with at least 18 innings pitched. That's the kind of stuff that wins you these games that you need to win. And then you have Mitch Keller, his emergence. You have Roansy Contreras. He's taken a step back, but he's still done fine. Rich Hill, you know what you're getting from Rich Hill most of the time. Johan Oviedo has taken a little bit of a step back. Luis Ortiz is still figuring out his stuff. And then, of course, Vince Velasquez went down with an injury. But as we're talking about the division, it's also interesting because the Brewers and Reds play this weekend as well. And I think that's what's given the Brewers the edge is you have Corbin Burns. Then you have guys like, I think Woodruff is hurt right now, but you have a Freddie Peralta. You have that pitching staff that you can trust. Even the Reds right now, you have Hunter Green, you have Nick Lodolo, you have Graham Ashcraft. You throw those guys out there, you can have some confidence that they're going to win. Then you look at the Cubs. To me, it's really Marcus Stroman and everybody else. Drew Smyly's kind of having a good year, but it's really Marcus Stroman and everybody else. And what you're speaking with the Cardinals is it kind of feels like it's just Miles Mikolas and everybody else. So do you truly think that pitching could end up being the major difference here, and teams in this division might become hot on the market for it just to be able to pitch against each other?
I think they have to be. I mean, if there's one place that I think you could improve each one of these teams in the division, it would be the pitching staffs. The Cardinals for sure. Definitely. They needed starting pitching coming into the year, and they didn't go out and get any. And you see what's happening because of that. And I think anybody, any team would love to grab themselves another solid starter. The question is how many aces are going to be out there and available? And that's the hard part to predict, because with the wild card series and all of this going into it, there's so many people who are in contention until the very end. Not a lot of teams are willing to give up somebody who is an ace. Like, would they dare trade Corbin Burns, thinking that even though they're still like in the hunt, but they may not be able to bring him back in 2 years? Like, is that something if some team pops off and says, hey, we got a major haul, like a Juan Soto type of haul we want to give you for Corbin Burns? Would they do that? Knowing that they probably aren't a team that's going to win a World Series, but they could win the division and go to the playoffs. You saw them do the Josh Hader thing last year, and that backfired humongously for them. So I wouldn't suspect that they would make that same mistake. But what aces are going to be out there? Who's coming up that's a free agent that's that big a deal that can make such a huge difference? I don't know. That's why you saw the Cardinals last year go off and trade with the Pirates and get Quintana, who was fantastic. Unfortunately, has been hurt for almost the whole season with the Mets so far, and go get Jordan Montgomery. Not huge names, but solid names that were, good pieces for that team and help them win the division last year. They definitely were a huge factor in what ended up being an NL Central championship for the Cardinals. But you saw what happened to them when they got to the playoffs. It didn't matter. They were out.
And it's interesting that you brought up that contention with the wild card too. I mean, right now you look at it, San Diego is 25-30. We'll be honest here. I'm sure both of us will be honest here. San Diego ain't that bad.
No.
The Phillies are 25-30. The Phillies aren't that bad.
No.
I mean, like, even the Rockies are 24-33, and they're 5.5 out of a wild card spot. It's the NL like specifically is crazy. It's nuts. But you mentioned some of those arms. I mean, I think you can definitely look to Chicago and look at the White Sox and say, okay, Lucas Giolito and Lance Lynn are probably going to get moved. I mean, they've picked it up as of late. They're 7 games back still, but they picked it up out of that horrific start they had. I'd name Lucas Giolito just because I think he'll be the top guy that could be available to any NL Central team, possibly.
Right, how good do you think Lucas Giolito is, in your opinion?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, what are you really getting?
Good? Not
and
really.
then you could throw in the Shohei Ohtani thing, but I don't think any team in this division is really getting Ohtani. That is a whole New York, LA deal. That is whatever New York team or whatever LA team wants to give them as much money as possible. I just don't know. It's one of those things with this division where you just truly don't know, JD. It's this whole thing a couple weeks from now could be so different. And even the trade deadline, you have to think, is still 50-something days away. How many games are you playing in between that? I mean, it's really nuts to think about where this division sits, where everybody in the NL in general sits and how things could be different in a couple of weeks. But of course, the Pirates and the Cardinals will be starting that couple of weeks against each other this weekend. So we'll talk about some trends, some keys to victory, and more. But of course, today's episode is brought to you by Gametime, as I mentioned earlier. Make sure you check out JD's Friday episode of my Friday episode ahead of tomorrow's 7:05 start. Yeah, I forgot that the Pirates were playing all their games early at 6:35, and now all of a sudden it's June and we've switched them all to 7:05.
Flip them.
Yeah, I don't know why, but who knows. So trends, keys to victory, and more. Trends-wise, you guys already heard me talk about both teams are kind of playing similar baseball over their last 10, 4-6 for the Pirates, 5-5 for the Cardinals. Where do you sit trends-wise with the Cardinals? What are some trends that Pirates fans should know?
Well, at the end of the month, the offense really started to tank. As I mentioned, they just looked like they were exhausted, going through the motions. They weren't putting a lot of runs up on the board. But the name that has popped off for the Cardinals this year, which is somebody that has really taken a huge step in season 2, and that's Nolan Gorman. He's been a monster, and he's one of the young players on the team, so he's not quite as fatigued as some of the older guys like Goldie and Arenado, Contreras. But he's a guy, obviously, that's been a huge difference maker. He's been very clutch. He just seems to come up in all the big situations, and when he does, 9 times out of 10, he gets that hit that's needed. So he's been big. But like I mentioned, a lot of these guys were not having great stretches at the end of May. Arenado was in a huge slump again. Contreras has been in my opinion, Contreras has been a monster disappointment so far. And this is nothing to do with him calling pitches behind the plate. I have no idea what that was about. I can't explain to you why they said the things they said and decided to make those. That was weird to me. I don't get it. But hitting wise, he's been on another slump. Like he was in April, he had a really cold start. Then he got hot for a couple of weeks, and now he's back to ice cold. So he's a guy that has to get going, because that's your number 4 and 5 hitters in the lineup normally is Arenado and Contreras. So if they're not coming through, you got some serious issues there. They just lost Lars Nootbaar to back spasms in the last game before they had these 2 days off. So we know he's day to day. They do not have Tyler O'Neill right now. They do not have Dylan Carlson. So their starting 3 outfielders are all out at the moment. Whether Nootbaar plays on Friday, I'm not sure. But, that means you're using backup outfielders for all 3 spots. And in some ways, they're using infielders. So Tommy Edman and Brendan Donovan have been playing the outfield instead, because that's how not good at defense and not great hitting it has been for any of the backup outfielders like an Alec Burleson or a Juan Yepes. They had to bring Oscar Mercado up from AAA. And it's, not great right now. But Michaelis, Flaherty, those guys have been on quite a nice run as far as starting pitching. So I know we're getting Flaherty on Friday. I would assume Michaelis will be Sunday. He should be pitching on 5 days rest still. So I don't know who we're going to have on Saturday. They'll make that announcement. We don't know who that is at the time of this recording. But, they could go Montgomery. They could go Wainwright if they want to. We'll have to see. But those are kind of the ups and downs of what's coming into this series for the Cardinals.
Yeah, and the big thing that was interesting in the month of May for me that I've really driven to my viewers is the Pirates in games that they scored just 4 runs, 4 or more runs. They were like 6-1 in those games. 4 runs is not like an astronomical amount of runs that you need in a game. And of course, you have an 8-0 win against Detroit, a 13-3 win against Arizona, 4-0 against Baltimore. 6-4 against Texas, 11-6 against Seattle, 9-4 in the last game against the Giants. When this offense scores, especially with the bullpen that you have and the starting pitching that you've been getting, that has been kind of the tandem that works together. It's okay, get 4 runs, you're probably not losing the game just because of how good the bullpen has been. David Bednar has 10 saves and 11 tries, just got his first save in quite a while a few days ago. Then you have Mitch Keller. He's like the fastest player in Pirates history, I think, the 90 strikeouts before June or something like that. I don't remember what it was, but it was crazy.
I'm glad we're missing him this series.
Yes, you get Rowanzi, you get Luis Ortiz, and then you get Rich Hill. So we don't even get Oviedo against his former team either. So I would say, as far as the starting rotation for this series, you are getting kind of the three guys that have been question marks. Mitch Keller has not been the question mark whatsoever. But it just really depends on what you want to see from this team and what offense you're getting. Brian Reynolds is going to do Brian Reynolds things. Andrew McCutchen closing out on a milestone that he'll probably complete over this homestand that starts with this series, then moves to Oakland and then the Mets. He's 6 hits away from 2,000 hits. He'll probably get that at some point over this homestand, I would assume. Then you have Jack Sawinski. When Jack Sawinski is on, man, he is on. But he needs to be on more. Inconsistency is what had killed this team all through May. And it was actually kind of relieving to hear when you were talking about the errors and the poor base running and all that stuff, that we weren't the only team that was doing that. Yeah. And that was really what plagued them in May. You had the defensive errors in Tampa Bay, which I gave them a pass for because you're playing on turf, you're playing in a dome, you're not used to it. But then it just continued and continued and continued over and over and over again. But when they haven't made those mistakes, pitching has done what it's supposed to do. Derek Shelton can get to that bullpen that he likes so much. Things work out. So really, it's just, can this offense consistently score 4 runs a game? And that doesn't sound like much at all. But the way they've played over the course of the last month, it is. There's been those games where they score, or those streaks where they score 3 runs in 18 innings, and you just look and you're like, they just scored 11 runs 2 days ago. Where did this offense go? Mm-hmm. So as long as the offense can show up and Brian Reynolds can do his thing, I really like the fact that it seems like they're finally giving Rodolfo Castro ample playing time because he cannot hit righties for whatever reason, but he's a lefty killer. But he's not going to figure out how to hit righties if he doesn't face righties. So at the end of the day, I mean, keys to victory for me for the Pirates here. You mentioned the pitching. You mentioned where it's at for the Cardinals. 4 runs. That's all I'm asking for. 4 runs in every game, and I like our chances. What are your keys to victory for the Cardinals there, obviously, with a little turmoil going on in the outfield, and then who will be pitching on Saturday?
It's just got to be the offense waking up. You know, if and for the Cardinals side of things, to give up 4 runs in a game with the people that you have in this lineup shouldn't be a big deal. You know, you should be able to outscore a team when they get 4, when you're putting out players like Goldschmidt and Arenado and Contreras and Tommy Edman and Gorman and Newpar. Like, they've got a solid lineup. They're able to explode on teams when they were fresh, and then they hit the skid at the end of this last 19 games, and they just kind of tapered off. They got to come out swinging. They got to come out hot, and that's kind of been the way this team was built, because we knew the starting pitching was going to be a little bit suspect, and they were going to have to outscore teams. That was how they were going to win games this year. So when they score like 6 or more or something like that is when they're, you know, which it should be for most teams. But when, you know, your starting pitchers are giving up, you know, a couple of them got ERAs like at 6, you know, when it's like that, you have to hit more. And when they were losing here at the in the last couple of series, it was just because they weren't hitting. So that's the key, in my opinion. Like their pitching is going to give up. They're going to give up runs. It does happen all the time. Yeah. Michaelis has been solid. Like I said, Flaherty has been great recently, but whoever throws that second game, you know, is probably going to give up 4 or 5 runs. It's just the way it has been all year. So the Cardinals bats need to come back to life, and they need to do it right away, because they got you guys. And then following this, they're going to be playing Cincinnati again. And then I believe they get the Cubs later again this month, but they're going to be taking on the Rangers, who we know who can score a lot of runs. They got Houston this month. So the bats are going to have to come to life, and they did it in the month of May. They were much better. I believe they had scored the 4th most runs in the league in May. So stay that way, stay the course, and hopefully things will work out.
Of course, and guys, don't forget, tune into this series, obviously. Tune into both of our episodes tomorrow. You could follow me on Twitter at MVP_Ethan or at Locked On Pirates. You could follow JD Hafron at JD Sports Radio or at Locked On or LO_Cardinals.
You got it.
Cool. Awesome. Guys, thank you so much for tuning into this Locked On Pirates and Locked On Cardinals crossover. I'm Ethan Smith. That's JD Hafron. We'll see you on the flip side.